And then Jay, I don't know about you, I want to know, let me see this mold, okay? There's different types of mold. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an industrial hygienist or an environmental engineer. Those are the terms for some of the experts we involve in these cases. I think you can buy a mold test now at Home Depot. You know, some clients have told me they've done that. Talk about this step, okay? We've thought about the law. We've thought about the landlord, the defendant. What about the actual mold? What's your approach here?
Yeah, and that's a real important question that a lot of times people jump over, and Kirby and I have talked about this in some detail. But you know, a lot of times I have folks come to see me and they say, well, I've got mold in my apartment, so I want to file a lawsuit. And that's understandable to think that way, but that's really cart before the horse, because there is a lot of different mold out there. And as any mold expert will tell you, there's a lot of mold out just outside. If you walk out the front door of your house, you're exposed to some mold, because that's just a natural part of our environment. And not all of it is harmful, and not all of it's toxic. Some of it is. And frankly, the presence of it in your apartment is not a good thing, okay? And that's something that a landlord should be required to fix. Now, as Kirby and I have discussed, there's not really any good black letter law on that says, you know, if you don't have hot water, the law is pretty clear that that's a violation for the landlord. If you don't have gas or heat, the law is pretty clear about that. There's nothing out there in the South Carolina Code that says if you've got mold in your apartment, then that's a violation. But from a practical perspective, if you get into a courtroom and you've got pictures of mold in your apartment that the landlord has refused to address, I don't care what kind it is, the judge is going to say that's a problem. Now, for your own kind of practical reasons, you want to know what it is. And so that's particularly true if you're feeling like you've got health problems, or your children have health problems coming from that. And, you know, we should touch at some point later on Kirby's organization and their role in those particular type of cases, because they serve a real important role in the community in protecting the health of families out there. But that's an important thing for you to figure out. And so there are the test kits that you can get, which will tell you what you've got to some reasonable degree of certainty. May or may not be, you know, terribly persuasive to a judge, but in magistrate's court, the bar for evidence is a lot lower than if we're in circuit court. So it's probably evidence. You can also go to some of these testing companies, and you can find them on Google, who will come in and do a more robust job and test and tell you from a more expert perspective what you're dealing with and how dangerous it is. Those guys cost some money, and so that's not always an easy thing to do. But I think figuring out what kind you've got, while at the same time going ahead and giving your landlord notice, which starts a 14-day clock for your landlord to try to remediate that and fix it. Those are two important things, and it's good to document. You know, even before you give your landlord notice, you know, take pictures, do that test, even if it's just an at-home test, so you have an idea. Because the next thing that can be problematic is, what is the definition of fixing the problem? And that's where I see a lot of problems in terms of folks coming to me. The landlord's come out and done something, but there's a real question as to whether that's adequate or not.
Very true. I would say regarding the mold, you know, I like to go out and actually see the property myself. I've done this a lot for many years across the upstate, and usually there's mold. We take pictures right away. That can prove a lot. I try to document the source of the moisture. Mold really does require moisture. So if you can show, hey, there's a leaking air conditioner unit, you know, there's water sitting, or, you know, some source of water, I would document that as well. You know, photograph that, have evidence about that. So it doesn't automatically, if you have a leak, mean mold, but you really can't have mold without moisture and a lack of ventilation. So be thinking about those elements that certainly pictures of the mold, black mold, that trying to make it clear it's not just mildew. It's not a situation where you just haven't cleaned. I've had that situation where I've gone out and thought, man, someone should just clean up a little. It helps to show that you mitigated, you did everything you could as a renter. But yeah, show the actual mold, show the source of the water, and then some lack of ventilation. Interesting, a lot of our modern, wonderful new buildings are more prone to mold in some ways than much older housing stock. How is that possible? Housing today is so much more energy efficient and tighter, the actual construction, and people tend to open their windows far less. So if you're thinking back, 100 years ago, some of the housing didn't have mold because there was just a lot of air coming through and ventilation in the sense that we don't have that today.